Navy, Army, I don't care. We have to fix this for the average member of the military, that they have a decent place where they can live.
The conditions service members live in directly affect military readiness and national security. It's the responsibility of Congress to authorize military funding to ensure the warfighter has what they need in combat and at home.
If it were my son or daughter that was being sent over there right now, I would be very, very concerned about the lack of clarity.
To discuss the policies and decisions shaping today's military bases, I sat down with Representative Mike Levin, who serves California's 49th District and sits on the House Appropriations Committee Subcommittee on Military Construction and Veterans Affairs.
What's the state of the Iranian nuclear program? We know less today than we did before the war began.
The opinions presented on the Jedburgh podcast and the Jedburgh Media Channel are the opinions of my guests and myself. They do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Green Beret Foundation, and the Green Beret Foundation assumes no liability for their accuracy. Nor does Green Beret Foundation endorse any political candidate or any political party. Congressman Levin, welcome to the Jedburgh podcast.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
It's been a while. We've been planning it for, I think, about a year or so, but
Wow.
Exciting time to come back into the halls of Congress. Always an honor to come down to D.C. and walk through here and just, see everybody who has the massive responsibility to keep our country going in all facets. And I think right now, we can have a lot of different discussions about the top line issues, and we see it in the news, we hear the rhetoric on both sides of the aisle, but at the end of the day, Congress has a job to do, and that job is to represent the American people and work in the best interest of the American people. That's also where we have the divide, because everybody has their own opinions of what's in the best interest, but you represent a really impressive portion of not only the country, but certainly of the state of California. So the 49th District, we're talking about the San Diego North County, and then the southern portion of Orange County. You have Camp Pendleton, 70,000 people, over 42,000 service members, plus their families. Grew up in LA. I lived in LA for a couple of years. My dad live in LA, very familiar with that whole area. But serving veterans has been a big part of your focus, as you now have served for, I think, four terms.
Four terms. Running for my fifth.
Yeah.
Time's flying.
But you have a big military constituency.
Yes,
there.
sir. Yep.
So when you look at what does it mean to serve that district, the 49th District of California, and the veteran population there, why is that so important to you?
Well, we're here in my office in the Rayburn office building, and off camera where my desk is a portrait of my grandpa. And that's a portrait that my mom painted of him in his bomber jacket as a tail gunner for a B-24 in World War II. And I was really blessed that I got to know him really well. He lived until I was in my late 20s. And he taught me a lot about what it means to serve the country. He did not get to see me elected to Congress, but his impact is with me every day. Of my four grandparents, I got very close to him. And I think that if he were here, he would remind me every day that when you decide whether or not you're going to send a young man or a young woman in harm's way, that you can't just leave it there. You have to consider, what is our country going to do to serve that person well when they get home from whatever that mission may be, whatever their service may be? It is imperative that we treat our veterans and our military families with the absolute respect, and that we don't try to shortchange them, that we don't try to undermine them, that the benefits, that the health care, that all of it is on point. All of it is consistent with who we are as Americans. And it's one thing for us to say, I support our troops, I support our Marines, I support our military. Another thing entirely to actually live up to that, not just during service, but after service as well. And my experience has been, having served on the Veterans Affairs Committee for 6 years, having chaired the subcommittee responsible for veteran homelessness and housing and the GI Bill and transition, that most military service members are looking for other ways to serve when they leave, whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's working in government, whether it's in a business, could be with a VSO or a service organization, could be a media outlet. They're looking for other ways to serve, and we better do everything we possibly can to help them in that desire to continue to serve.
In conflict, you don't have months to plan. Outdated or incomplete information can cost more than time. One Brief's operational planning and workflow platform makes military staffs superhuman. Update plans in seconds, collaborate seamlessly across distributed environments, and streamline operations with AI-enabled tools. The result? Everyday optimized staffs enable commanders to make smarter decisions in seconds.
You've been very active, as you mentioned, with the VA, having served on the committees, the subcommittees. Now you serve on the House Appropriations Committee, and also for Military Construction and the Veterans Affairs Subcommittee, which you're really looking at the budget that's going to the VA. And, and military construction is another. I had a chance, actually, last year I sat down with Senator Bozeman from Arkansas, who sits on the Senate Military Construction Committee as well. And we talk at quality of life. You live, as we mentioned, in a beautiful area of the country, but quality of life for our service members is really critically important, because we cannot expect them to go do their job at a high level if they're not provided the right housing, their family's not taken care of. When you look at the quality of life in your district and the initiatives that have been forward to improve that, what are you doing to serve the Camp Pendleton community? And then, I'll give a shout out to our Navy SEAL brothers. Even as a Green Beret, we got to do that. But there's a lot of them in that area.
Well, I will tell you, first of all, that it's an incredible honor to get to represent Camp Pendleton, and we've got real issues with barracks, not just on Camp Pendleton, but all across the Marine Corps, really all across the military. You've got places that are either uninhabitable or certainly not acceptable, and I see it as all readiness. So we use the term quality of life. I just think it's readiness, because if you don't have a clean and safe place to stay, to sleep, to train, to eat, if you're not getting good quality food, all of it is part of making Marines at Camp Pendleton. Part of making sure our warfighters are prepared for whatever may come their way. Part of it is they have to have a decent place to live. And what I have tried to do is work with our Marine Corps leadership on the Barracks 2030 initiative. It's going to require $11 billion over the next, say, decade and a half. If they do everything exactly the way they want, it'll be done around 2037. So if you just take Camp Pendleton, for example, there are around 125 or so different physical buildings, and about half of them need to either be gutted completely or knocked down and start over. Then the other half, you can rehabilitate, you can improve, and the Marines do a great job of now trying to put, HVAC systems in, but it's very much like Band-Aids, where we really need to rethink, okay, what do we want for our housing to look like in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? Now, what the Navy has done, and it might work better for them than for the Marine Corps, is they partnered with private developers. And given the transitory nature of our Marines, it may not work as easily to go into, and also the need to adhere to chain of command, it might not work as well for the Marine Corps. But Pacific Beacon, for example, in San Diego, is this new housing project that I visited. And it's as nice as any civilian apartment complex. And the Marine that works for me was looking at it like, I don't know about these Navy guys, what they're doing here in this thing. But there are opportunities for that sort of thing. In certain parts of the military, it works better. For the Marines, I just think we need clean, safe, habitable. We're not looking for the Ritz-Carlton. We're just looking for a decent place. And I've been really proud. We've gotten around $300 million since I started in 2019 for Camp Pendleton specifically, for a variety of different projects. I'm always proud when it's not just, the traditional project that you would expect, where it's a weapons system or it's a more traditional military application. That's great. That's needed. But when we can do a child development center, or when we can do barracks, or when we can do a new mess, or whatever it may be, that gives me great satisfaction, be able to actually go back and see those investments, because I know that we're helping, in ways that are really important. And sometimes we overlook the schools on base. So it's really important we do impact aid, and those child development centers now. Another one is going to be built on Camp Pendleton. I think they're fantastic. They're, in many ways, they're as good or better than what the civilian community has access to. Same with the schools, being able to invest in those schools. So, there are some of us that we continue to be really focused on that. I'm hopeful that this year the bill, the relevant appropriations bill to handle military construction and veterans affairs, that we can get to a bipartisan bill. And it is very disappointing when we haven't been able to do that in the past, because it should be bipartisan.
How much do we need?
Total, well, $11 billion for barracks 2030. The overall MILCON VA bill, we'll have to see exactly where we land. But as an overall percentage of our federal government, it's not that big. Of course, when you have bigger military construction projects, they fit in the MILCON. When it's smaller, they fit in the defense bill. So it's that $2 million cap, where a lot of it falls in the defense bill. But for the big projects, particularly new construction, that's where the MILCON bill comes in. And we're talking, several $1 billion worth of new construction that'll be needed every year for not just for the West Coast. We have MCI West out in our area that has 5 installations, and but the rest of the country, there are big gaps and big problems. And I don't care if it's Navy, Army, I don't care. We have to fix this for the average member of the military, that they have a decent place where they can live.
Well, we're going to be sitting down here in a couple of weeks from now with the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps.
Great guy.
Sergeant Major Ruiz.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
I had a chance to meet him once briefly, so we just got that on the calendar. I was able to sit down with Troy Black, who was his predecessor, and then went on to be the SEAC on the Joint Staff. But how does it get to that point? When we look across the military, because I served over almost 13 years in the military, and you saw everything from brand new, state of the art, everything you could ever ask for, to places that you wouldn't want to walk into.
I say it's 2 things. One is it's decades of underinvestment, buildings that are not being maintained or rehabilitated, that outlive their life by decades. And the other is sort of a culture that needs to shift, where, and Sergeant Major Ruiz is really on top of this, where historically, if you're a junior enlisted Marine and you're not living in the greatest place, you might feel like if you complain about it, you're going to get in trouble. And we need to turn that on its head and say, if you don't complain about it, and you have something, if you have mold, if you have lights that don't work, if you have plumbing that doesn't work, whatever it may be, and you don't complain about it, and they come in and inspect, and you didn't complain about it, then you get in trouble. And it's that culture shift, it's turning it on its head, where that young Marine knows, okay, I got to have this is a reflection of having a clean and safe place, is a reflection of my overall need to report and to be transparent and to be diligent and disciplined. That's part of that. And so I know that the Marines want to see that happen, but making it happen is, I think, that's really the key. And it's a shift in mentality that, how that place is. It's not just that your bed's made, but that it has to be in decent habitable shape. And if it's not, you need to speak out.
Yeah. You termed it readiness.
Yep.
Let's talk about Iran.
Yeah. Top
line news, first thing we're seeing every day, which we should be seeing it, first and foremost every day. There's a few ways we can go about kind of discussing this, but if we tie it to readiness, I think in a lot of ways we've witnessed the next generation of warfare over the last month plus, as we've been engaged in this conflict. You and your district are front and center when it comes to military readiness. And if you go south one district into San Diego, we have the Pacific, fleet sits, majority of it sits over there. And we have out of San Diego. And we have seen the U.S. Navy now front and center in this fight, which is being a global war on terror combat veteran. That was an Army and Marine ground-centric fight.
Yep.
And in a lot of ways, the Navy was a supporting asset, and now them in the Air Force have really carried this thing forward. We have made significant investment over the last 20, 30 years in the capabilities of both of those components. What do you see when you look at the readiness levels of the Navy and the Air Force in this Iran fight?
So I think you have to separate a couple things. One is the operational excellence of our service members. I think they're ready for whatever they're asked to do. The challenge is the lack of clarity about what they're being asked to do. And it goes back to February 28th when Epic Fury began. And I've seen it, time and again, whether we're talking about the blockade, whether we're talking about where are the 2,200 Marines from Camp Pendleton, from the 11th MEU, where are they going to go? For what purpose are they being sent? So, you could tell me, you experienced it, you lived it, that, when you were deployed, my hope is that your family, your fellow service members, and your member of Congress, whoever that may have been, had a better understanding of why you were being sent, what the mission was, what success looked like, and what the plan was to get you back home, would be my hope. When the operation began, I was asleep. It was the middle of the night, and I understand the need for surprise. But it was just 3 or 4 days before Epic Fury that the president gave his State of the Union address. I think he spoke for an hour, 47 minutes. I sat through all of it, and I think 3 or 4 minutes was dedicated to Iran. And if you go back, I went back and I looked at the 3 or 4 minutes. There was no indication that we were going to be engaged in military hostilities in 3 or 4 days' time. The prior brief that we'd received about Iran indicated that Witkoff and Kushner were getting closer to some sort of deal. And then, of course, middle of the night from Mar-a-Lago, the president does a social media video. I was woken up 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning to see that, really surprised. And then when we got one brief, classified brief, and I can't tell you what they briefed us on, but I can tell you what they didn't brief us on, which is what the hell the plan was going to be. We never were told, and we still haven't been told. And I don't know if there really is a comprehensive, well thought out strategy, and what's the exit look like. No vote by Congress, no pre-existing AUMF that I think applies, because if you look at the 01 AUMF, you try to apply it to this, the Iranians were not Al-Qaeda, the Iranians were not directly related to 9/11 to the extent necessary for the 01 AUMF to apply. So if there's no pre-existing AUMF, the War Powers Act requires that the president notify the Congress within 48 days or 48 hours, and that you have a vote. And we never had the vote. Some people have misinterpreted the 60-day part of the War Powers Act. I don't think they've read the War Powers Act. They've said, well, the president can do what he wants for up to 60 days. It's not what it says. It says if we are attacked, if the United States is attacked, the president can respond to an emergency for up to 60 days without express authorization of Congress. That hasn't happened here. We bombed them. They didn't bomb us. And so, in my view, it's a war that is unauthorized. It is a war without a clear exit plan. And if it were my son or daughter that was being sent over there right now, I would be very, very concerned about the lack of clarity. And members of Congress don't know what's happening, where the blockade is leading, what the 50,000 service members over there, more being sent now. Even today, there was a report in the Washington Post that several thousand more are being sent. Is it to ramp up pressure? And the two sides are very far apart. I'm encouraged that they are, that there was a ceasefire announced, that they are having talks, maybe now another round of talks. If you look at what the Iranians are offering, in some ways it's better than the JCPOA, but in some ways it's worse. It's worse than what Trump, in some ways, worse than what Trump gave up when he negated the JCPOA. What Vance was advocating for, 6 red lines, 20 years, all that, great. But how are we actually going to get that done? There's nothing in the recent history of the Iranians that tell me that we're going to get that done. So where do we land? How does this end? What damage have we done to our alliances around the world? A lot, a lot. And it's one of those things where when the president acts unilaterally, doesn't get the buy-in from our allies, and then gets mad at them when they don't come rushing to our aid for Strait of Hormuz, to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, it jeopardizes everything that my grandpa fought for 80 years ago, which is that, we use the term rules-based international order, but yeah, it has worked pretty well since World War II. And giving it up for what? So America can go it alone, so we can cede our global leadership to China and to other countries that don't like us very much. I think it's a massive, massive mistake.
Would you agree, though, that Iran is a direct threat to the United States?
Well, it depends on your definition of direct. Under the War Powers Act, it's very clear it has to be imminent. Was there an imminent threat to the United States? I don't have a clear answer because we were not provided any information, classified or unclassified, indicating that it was a direct and imminent threat to the United States. What's the state of the Iranian nuclear program? We know less today than we did before the war began. Less about the quantity, the location of uranium, enriched uranium. We know that we've diminished their ballistic missile capacity, but we don't know about the nuclear program. And what we are hearing is that you might have ground troops go into parts of Iran with enriched uranium. So my short answer is no. And I hear all the arguments, but I haven't heard anything concrete behind closed doors in a classified setting that leads me to believe that the Iranian regime, other than the rhetorical threat to America, was an actual real-time imminent threat to America. And I hope that evidence comes to light, but I don't expect it. I don't expect it. Is the world better off without a nuclear-armed Iran? Of course. That was why the JCPOA was originally negotiated and had plenty of shortcomings. Not saying it was perfect at all, but we actually find ourselves in a position today where we may be worse off than we were before.
What about their state sponsorship of terrorism? Now, I mean, I deployed 3 times to Iraq. I have greater than 30 months. Most of that time was in southern Iraq, 2 deployments in special forces to southern Iraq, directly combating the IRGC and the Iranian threat. The blood of many of my friends, some who are with us, many who are not, are at the hands of the Iranians. We have engaged with combat with the Houthi rebels in Yemen. We've seen the situation in Israel on October 7th.
Horrible.
We have seen the situation in Lebanon with Hezbollah, and we know that they have an ability, and thankfully we haven't seen it yet here in the States, but we know that they have a desire and ability to hit us in the homeland.
Right.
At a time and place, honestly, of their choosing.
Right.
So how do you view that threat?
I see it as a serious threat and an awful regime. The question is whether or not the military action has made it a worse problem, or has it actually ameliorated the problem? So replacing Khamenei with his son, you replace a 85, 86-year-old extremist with a 56-year-old extremist. The IRGC still sits around the corner, 200, 300,000 all around the country. They are firmly entrenched. There's nothing that has been indicated to back up the president's assertion that the regime has changed. There might be new physical human beings, but they're still carrying out the same extremist ideology. To the extent there's a threat to the American homeland, this war may be exacerbating that threat, not making it better. So everything you say is right. The Iranians have, for 47 years, as long as I've been alive, they've been a horrible regime. They've done untold damage to so many people, including so many people that you served with. The strategic objective of denuclearizing, eliminating their ballistic missile capability, trying to provide some sort of path forward for a more peaceful Middle East, trying to help our allies in the region so that they're not always looking over their shoulder in fear. All of those are righteous and appropriate objectives. The question is whether or not epic fury and the events since will actually lead to those objectives, and also whether or not the whole strategy was well thought through with regard to the Strait of Hormuz. If you go back to last summer, public reporting is that a lot of people at state who were experts on the oil and gas trading were fired. They were let go as part of the DOGE, part of the the whole overhaul of state and throughout the federal government. And it would be really nice to have those experts there right now. Nobody, it appears, nobody articulated or nobody made the case forcefully enough to the president that doing this was going to lead to a dramatic spike in oil prices and pain at the gas pump for the average person. The president has said, I think, without, I personally don't believe this, that, well, we thought it would be worse. Well, I don't buy that for a second, because the president ran on lowering energy prices. He said he was going to cut gas prices. Even 3 days before in the State of the Union, he was, again, telling a falsehood that it was $1.95 or $1.99 a gallon. It wasn't, but clearly, I think if they had known that gas prices were going to go through the roof right before a midterm election, maybe they would have slowed their roll. But they didn't, because I don't think he was getting good advice. I don't think the president has enough people around him telling him what he needs to hear, not what he wants to hear, but what he needs to hear, which is that this stuff is really complicated. And if you take the toothpaste out of the tube, which is what they did, you better be prepared for the consequences. And I don't know if they are. And we don't know because we have not been briefed.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you about that. Can we negotiate with the Iranians?
Well, the Obama administration did. And whether you agree or disagree with the conclusion of how the JCPOA went down, again, there were a lot of shortcomings to it. It demonstrated that there is an ability to enter into those diplomatic negotiations, and we ought to try. We ought to try. Use of military force should be the absolute last resort, always. Like, my thing is, I always want the best prepared, most highly trained warfighters anywhere in the world. I want the best of the best. I never want them to have to use any of those weapons that we appropriate money for every year. I never want them to have to, put themselves in harm's way. When you know as many military spouses as I do, when you know as many military families as we've gotten to know in our community over many years, the last thing you want to see is for them to be put in harm's way, which is why the founders were really smart. And they said, under Article 1, Section 8, it is not the role or the responsibility of the president to send service members into harm's way. It is the role of the Congress to deliberate, to debate, to evaluate the merits. None of that happened here, right? None of that happened in this particular instance. Whatever one thinks of George W. Bush went to the UN, Colin Powell. George W. Bush went to the Congress. Whatever you think of, any of the post 9/11 conflicts, or for that matter before, people bring up Bill Clinton and Kosovo. Every major military operation in our lifetimes, the President of the United States went to the Congress, went to the international community, and tried to seek buy-in and presented a case, presented a cost-benefit estimate of why are we doing this? And that is why this is an unprecedented situation in the modern history of our country. And, where this leads is really scary. And they relied on, in part, the exceptions to the War Powers Act that I think the Obama administration inappropriately relied on in Libya, which was, well, it's only, it's kinetic, but it's not boots on the ground. Look, if it's a major military operation, Congress needs a say. Period, full stop, end of story.
I got one more question on that, and then
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you something else real quick, and then I know you got a busy day ahead of you as Congress has come back in. It's so divisive right now. You have been, one of the reasons we're sitting here with you is because you have been very centric in a lot of your ability to work bipartisan. And to me, that's very important. It's very important to sit down and hear the opinions of folks where you can actually have a discussion about the
Yeah.
issues, understand that, hey, maybe you're going to agree to disagree, but at the end of the day, you're going to find a resolution.
Yeah.
You've worked very hard in your terms in Congress to work with the other side of the aisle, bring Republicans on to co-sponsor a lot of the initiatives that you put forward,
Yep.
most of those supporting our veterans.
All of them.
True. And they're on
Yeah.
the wall. They're on the wall.
Well,
over
if you
here.
look up there's a lot of those bills that are signed by Trump. And in the first term, I think we got 16 bills signed when Trump was president in the first couple years that I was here. And it's so much tougher now.
How do we bridge the gap? Because from the outside, I mean, I'm not in Congress. I'm not involved in the government. I have a fortunate opportunity to sit down with yourself and many of your peers and our military and government leaders. But as an American, as a veteran
Yeah.
who has gone to combat for this nation and now watch my friends doing the same, we want to see our government work
Absolutely.
for us.
Absolutely.
How, in your opinion, do we bridge this divide, bring Congress together, bring the three branches of our government, because it's not just Congress.
Yeah.
How do we bring everybody together and truly serve the American people? Because we can argue all day long of what that actually means, but government shutdowns, complete disarray doesn't serve the American people.
So I'll take a crack at this, and it's a complicated answer, but I'll give you the best perspective I have based on doing this now for 8 years. I am personally never going to see the other side as my enemy. I see them as my political opponent, but never as my enemy. And the people that I've run against have all been people that I've been friendly with. We disagree on a lot of things, but at the end of the day, as Reagan and Tip O'Neill used to, go and get a beer, we need to get back to that. But it starts, you got to have somebody like Ronald Reagan, and you got to have somebody like Tip O'Neill who are willing to recognize, hey, at the end of the day, we're all Americans. And for all their awful disagreements over the years, George W. Bush, Nancy Pelosi, they were able to at least be human beings to one another. I never saw President Bush denigrate the entire Democratic Party that way. I never saw Joe Biden denigrate the Republican Party that way. I never saw Barack Obama denigrate the Republican Party that way. Never saw Bill Clinton do it. Never saw, for that matter, back then, I never saw Newt Gingrich treat Bill Clinton that way. So, and they had plenty of fights. So it starts from the top. And anybody that's unwilling to admit that or see that, I would just encourage them to just change the channel for a little while, take a deep breath, exhale, and just think objectively about what we see day in and day out from this president.
Got to watch both Fox and CNN.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
That's what I do.
Right.
You got to switch it up. Congressman, I thank you for inviting us into the office.
You got me
today.
fired up, man. You got me fired up.
I mean, as you said, and I think you correctly said it in terms of the Iran conflict, this is not an easy challenge.
Right.
Running the United States is not an easy challenge, regardless of where you sit, whether you're in Congress, whether you're the president in the executive branch, whether you're in the judicial branch. This country is going to be turned 250 years old here in a couple of months, and we've come a long way. We have a long way to go, but at the end of the day, this is a complicated challenge. And in the military, we called it the second and third order effects. No decision that you make, regardless of where you sit, is going to be in a microcosm, in a vacuum. And what we have to do, and what we encourage our leaders to do, is think very clearly through those second and third order effects to understand the weight and the impact of their decisions. And it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. It doesn't matter what your opinions are. But as a citizen, that's what I believe we need from our elected leaders, and we have to do it together. So.
Amen. Well, I want to thank you for your sacrifices for our nation, for your desire to continue serving, as so many of our veterans want to continue to find ways to serve. Your ability to continue to educate and inform people is really important. And I care about this institution, the House of Representatives and the Congress of the United States, very deeply. And I think that we are at an inflection point right now where if Congress continues to give up its constitutionally prescribed role, that we will not get it back. And, we did not fight in 2 world wars, in the Revolution, so that we would have a system that was authoritarianism, that was, anything other than the product of that 250 years, which is a constitutional democracy, a republic with checks and balances, with a functioning judiciary independent of the legislative branch, independent of the executive, and a legislative branch that can stand on its own 2 feet. And that certainly includes the most important role that I ever have as a Congress member, which is that determination when and how we send service members into harm's way, making sure they have the resources and the training to do whatever we need them to do best in the world, but also being judicious and responsible and thoughtful about how and when. And my concern right now is that standard has not been met, that Congress has not stood up as the Constitution requires, and that the administration doesn't really care what Congress thinks. And I'm asking, I'll close by saying that every person running for president or thinking about it in 2028, I ask them what is a tough question: will they be willing to give up some power back to the Congress to restore some basic checks and balances? Because I think that's ultimately what we're going to need.
Well, I look forward to coming back and discussing it more with you and the
you.
continued work you do for your constituents and all of our veterans.
Thank you.
I'll sit down with Sergeant Major Ruiz. We'll talk about Camp
Say hi
Pendleton.
for me. He's a great man.
I'll say hi to you and look forward to following up with you after that.
Thank you.
So thank you.
American Jedburghs went on to form the foundation of the United States Special Forces and the Special Activities Directorate of the Central Intelligence Agency. Thanks for listening to the Jedburgh Podcast, an official program of the Green Beret Foundation. I'm your creator and host, Fran Racioppi. Join us next week for a new episode on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube for full episodes, highlights, and other long and short form content. If you like what you heard, give us a like and leave a review. Follow the Jedburgh Podcast and the Green Beret Foundation on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, X, or Threads. Send your comments and inquiries to fran@jedburghpodcast.com. As former members of Special Operations Forces, the Jedburgh Media Channel and the Green Beret Foundation remain committed to supporting all generations of U.S. Army Special Forces and their families. Thanks for joining us on this episode. How you prepare today determines success tomorrow.